The gunshot echoed across the empty Montana plains as Lucas Easton lowered his rifle, watching the deer fall. Food for another week, he thought, ignoring the ache in his shoulders that seemed to grow heavier with each passing season. At 32, he wasn't old by any means, but the weight of responsibility had aged him beyond his years. The year was 1878, and Lucas had been raising his brother's 4 children alone for nearly 3 years now, ever since consumption had taken both James and his wife Sarah within weeks of each other. "Uncle Lucas," a young voice called out. 10-year-old Thomas came running over the hill, his younger brother Daniel trailing behind. "Did you get one?" Lucas nodded, securing his rifle before approaching the fallen deer. "Just in time for supper. Go fetch the wagon, would you?" As the boys scampered off, Lucas removed his hat and wiped the sweat from his brow. The late August heat was unforgiving, beating down on the prairie without mercy. His ranch, modest as it was, sat nestled between rolling hills a few miles outside of White Ridge, a growing settlement that had sprung up alongside the railroad 5 years prior. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew Lucas's attention. Sheriff Wilkins rode up, his gray mustache twitching as he nodded a greeting. "Afternoon, Lucas. Good hunt. Can't complain," Lucas replied, gesturing toward the deer. "What brings you out this way, Sheriff?" "Got a letter for you. Would have waited till you came to town, but figured you'd want to see it right away." He handed over a slightly wrinkled envelope. "It's from back east." Lucas frowned, turning the envelope over in his calloused hands. His name was written in elegant script he didn't recognize. "Appreciate it." "How are those youngsters doing?" Wilkins asked, adjusting his position in the saddle. "Growing like weeds. Hannah turned 13 last month. Getting to be quite the young lady. The others keep me on my toes." "You're doing right by your brother, Lucas. Not many men would take on 4 children not their own." Lucas shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Their family. What else would I do?" After the sheriff departed, Lucas tucked the letter into his pocket, deciding to read it later. The boys returned with the wagon, and together they loaded the deer for the journey home. The Easton Ranch wasn't grand by any means, a sturdy 2-story farmhouse, a barn, stables, and a bunkhouse that currently housed only 2 ranch hands. But it was home, and Lucas had worked tirelessly to keep it that way after James's passing. As they approached, Lucas spotted Hannah hanging laundry while keeping an eye on 7-year-old Lily, who was playing with her doll on the porch. His nieces and nephews, his children now, in all but blood. "Uncle Lucas," Lily shouted, abandoning her doll to run toward the wagon. Her blonde braids bounced against her shoulders as she ran, her smile wide despite the missing front tooth. "We got deer, Lily girl," Thomas announced proudly. "I helped spot it." Lucas lifted Lily up, settling her on his hip with practiced ease. "You been good for your sister today?" Lily nodded emphatically. "Hannah's teaching me to sew. I made a handkerchief. Did you now? I'll have to see this fine handiwork." Hannah approached, wiping her hands on her apron. At 13, she was already showing signs of the beautiful woman she would become, with their mother's auburn hair and their father's serious eyes. "Supper's almost ready," she said. "Mr. Jensen stopped by with some vegetables from his garden." Lucas nodded. "I'll get this dressed, and we'll have fresh venison tomorrow." He set Lily down and headed toward the barn with the deer, pausing to pull the mysterious letter from his pocket. Breaking the seal, he unfolded the paper and began to read. "Dear Mr. Easton, you don't know me, but I was a dear friend of your sister-in-law, Sarah. My name is Margaret O'Connor, and I have recently learned of the tragic passing of both Sarah and James. I was heartbroken to hear of their fate and the 4 children they left behind. Sarah and I grew up together in Boston and remained correspondents after her marriage and move west. In her last letter to me some years ago, she spoke so fondly of their life in Montana and of you, her husband's kind brother. I am writing to inform you that I am relocating to White Ridge to take a position as the town's new schoolteacher. Sarah often mentioned how much she wished for a proper education for her children, and I feel compelled to honor her memory by offering my assistance in any way I can. I will arrive by train on September 10th. I hope we might meet, as I would very much like to know how the children are faring. Respectfully yours, Margaret O'Connor. Lucas read the letter twice more, a frown creasing his weathered face. September 10th was just 3 days away. He wasn't sure how he felt about this stranger from Sarah's past inserting herself into their lives, but he couldn't deny that the children, especially Hannah, would benefit from proper schooling. His attempts at education in the evenings were woefully inadequate, and he knew it. Folding the letter, he tucked it back into his pocket and continued with the task of dressing the deer. He'd think on it later. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Lucas sat on the porch, nursing a small glass of whiskey. The night was cool, stars scattered across the vast Montana sky like diamonds on black velvet. The letter lay open on his knee. "Penny for your thoughts," came a voice from the darkness. Hank Miller, one of his two ranch hands, stepped into the circle of lamplight, pipe in hand. "Got a letter today," Lucas said, offering the bottle. "Friend of Sarah's coming to town. New schoolteacher." Hank poured himself a modest drink and leaned against the porch railing. "That's so? Might be good for the young uns." Lucas nodded. "Hannah's smart. Smarter than me by half. Been feeling guilty. I can't give her and the others the learning they deserve. You've given them a home, food, safety. Don't be too hard on yourself." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the crickets providing a nighttime chorus. "She wants to meet them," Lucas finally said. "This friend of Sarah's. You worried?" Lucas considered the question. "Don't know. Feels strange. Someone coming here with a connection to Sarah that I don't share." Hank chuckled. "Or maybe you're just worried about facing a proper Boston lady with your rough manners." Despite himself, Lucas smiled. "I do recall how to use a fork, Hank." "Could have fooled me," Hank replied, finishing his drink. "Well, I'd best turn in. Early start tomorrow." After Hank left, Lucas remained on the porch, his thoughts turning to the mysterious Margaret O'Connor. What was she like? What had Sarah told her about their life here? And why, after all this time, was she really coming? September 10th arrived with a clear sky and a cool breeze that hinted at the coming fall. Lucas had decided, after much deliberation, to meet the train. He dressed in his best shirt, which wasn't saying much, and even trimmed his beard. The children, excited by the prospect of meeting someone who had known their mother, were scrubbed clean and wearing their Sunday clothes. "Will she look like Mama?" Lily asked as they waited on the platform, her small hand tucked in Lucas's larger one. "I don't know, sweetheart," he answered honestly. "But she knew Mama when they were girls, so she'll have stories to tell." The train's whistle announced its approach, and soon the massive iron horse was pulling into the station, belching steam and smoke. Passengers began to disembark: a businessman in a suit, a family with two small children, an elderly couple. And then she appeared. Margaret O'Connor stepped onto the platform with graceful confidence, her emerald green traveling dress a stark contrast to the dusty surroundings of White Ridge Station. She was younger than Lucas had expected, perhaps 25 or 26, with chestnut hair neatly arranged beneath a modest hat. But it was her eyes that caught his attention, bright, intelligent, and scanning the platform with purpose. When those eyes landed on Lucas and the children, recognition flashed across her features. She approached with a warm smile. "Mr. Easton?" she asked, her voice carrying a hint of an Eastern accent. Lucas nodded, suddenly feeling tongue-tied and awkward. "Miss O'Connor, welcome to White Ridge." "Thank you for coming to meet me," she said, then turned her attention to the children. "And these must be Sarah's children. You've grown so much since the photographs she sent me." Hannah stepped forward, ever the proper young lady. "I'm Hannah, madam. These are my brothers Thomas and Daniel, and my sister Lily." Margaret's smile deepened. "I'm very pleased to meet you all. Your mother wrote so often about you. I feel as though I know you already." Lily tugged at Margaret's skirt. "Did you know my mama when she was little like me?" Margaret knelt down, bringing herself to Lily's level. "I did indeed. We used to play with dolls together and have tea parties. She was my very best friend." Lily's eyes widened with delight. Lucas watched the interaction, struck by the gentle way Margaret spoke to his niece and the genuine emotion that shone in her eyes when she mentioned Sarah. "Let me help with your bags, Miss O'Connor," Lucas finally said, breaking from his thoughts. "That's very kind, Mr. Easton. I'm staying at Mrs. Wilson's boarding house until I find more permanent lodgings." "We know Mrs. Wilson," Thomas piped up. "She makes the best apple pie in the county." Margaret laughed, a melodic sound that seemed to lighten the air around them. "Then I'm sure I'll be very comfortable there." As they walked toward the wagon, Lucas found himself stealing glances at Sarah's friend. There was something about her, a quiet strength beneath her refined exterior, that intrigued him. She wasn't what he'd expected at all. School begins next Monday, Margaret explained as they loaded her trunks into the wagon. I hope to see all of you children there. Hannah's face lit up. Really, Uncle Lucas? Can we go? Lucas hadn't considered it before. The ranch was a fair distance from town, and getting the children to school daily would be a challenge. But seeing Hannah's excitement, he couldn't bring himself to dismiss the idea outright. We'll figure something out, he promised, earning a smile from both Hannah and Margaret. The ride to Mrs. Wilson's boarding house was filled with the children's eager questions and Margaret's patient answers. She told them stories about their mother as a girl, how Sarah had once climbed the tallest tree in their neighborhood on a dare, how she'd taught Margaret to skip stones across the pond in the park, how she'd always been the bravest among their friends. Lucas listened, seeing Sarah in a new light through Margaret's stories. His sister-in-law had always been kind but reserved around him. The spirited girl Margaret described was a revelation. Your brother was a lucky man, Margaret said quietly to Lucas as the children explored Mrs. Wilson's garden after they'd arrived. Sarah loved him very much. Her letters were full of their happiness here. Lucas nodded, unexpectedly moved. They were good together. Happy. And now you're raising their children. She would be grateful. I'm doing my best, Lucas admitted. Though I fear my best isn't always enough. Margaret studied him, her gaze thoughtful. From what I can see, Mr. Easton, your best is quite remarkable indeed. There was something in her voice, a warmth, an admiration that caught Lucas off guard. He found himself wanting to live up to the man she seemed to see in him. Will you come for dinner tomorrow? He found himself asking. At the ranch? The children would love it, and, well, I'd like to hear more about Sarah. Margaret smiled, and Lucas felt something shift inside him, like a door long closed creaking open just a fraction. I would be delighted, she replied. The next day, Lucas was a bundle of nerves as he prepared for Margaret's visit. He'd instructed Hank and the other ranch hand, Charlie, to slaughter one of the chickens for dinner. Hannah had baked bread, and they'd picked fresh vegetables from their small garden. You're pacing, Uncle Lucas, Hannah observed with a knowing smile as she set the table. Are you nervous about Miss O'Connor coming? Don't be ridiculous, Lucas grumbled, though his collar suddenly felt too tight. Just want to make a good impression for your mother's friend, is all. Hannah raised an eyebrow but said nothing more, though the small smile didn't leave her face. At precisely 4 o'clock, the sound of an approaching buggy announced Margaret's arrival. Lucas straightened his vest and ran a hand through his hair before stepping onto the porch. Margaret looked even lovelier than the day before, dressed in a simple blue dress that complemented her fair complexion. Her hair was arranged more simply today, with tendrils framing her face that caught the late afternoon sunlight. Your home is beautiful, Mr. Easton, she said as he helped her down from the buggy. Sarah described it in her letters, but seeing it in person, it's exactly as she painted it with her words. Lucas looked around at the ranch, the weathered house, the barn that needed painting, the clothesline strung between 2 posts, and tried to see it through her eyes. It's nothing fancy, but it's home. The best homes rarely are fancy, she replied with a smile. They're simply filled with love. The children burst from the house then, surrounding Margaret with excited greetings. Lily took her hand, eager to show her the doll that had once belonged to her mother, while Thomas wanted to demonstrate how fast he could run. Margaret gave each child her full attention, seeming genuinely interested in their enthusiastic sharing. Dinner was a lively affair. Margaret fit seamlessly into their family table, asking questions that drew even shy Daniel into conversation. She complimented Hannah's bread, listened to Thomas's tall tales with appropriate amazement, helped Daniel cut his chicken, and let Lily sit beside her, occasionally stroking the little girl's hair in a gesture so maternal it made Lucas's chest tighten. After the meal, as the sun began to set, Lucas suggested a walk to show Margaret the rest of the ranch. The children scattered to their evening chores, leaving the adults alone for the first time. You've done wonders with them, Margaret said as they walked toward the corral. They're happy, healthy, and so well-mannered. That's Hannah's doing more than mine, Lucas admitted. She stepped up after we lost them. Takes care of the little ones like she's their mother, not their sister. A heavy burden for a young girl. Too heavy, Lucas agreed. I worry about her. Margaret nodded, understanding in her eyes. School will be good for her. A chance to just be a girl for a few hours each day. They reached the corral, where several horses grazed peacefully in the golden light of sunset. Margaret approached the fence, and a chestnut mare wandered over, curious. "Hello. Beautiful," Margaret murmured, reaching out a hand. "That's Penny," Lucas said. "Gentlest horse we have." Margaret stroked Penny's nose, smiling when the horse nuzzled her palm. "I've always loved horses. My father kept several when I was growing up." "You ride, then?" "Since I was a girl. Though it's been some time since I've had the opportunity." Lucas leaned against the fence beside her, acutely aware of her proximity. "You're welcome to ride her anytime. Might be useful for getting around town." "That's very kind of you," Margaret said, turning to face him. The setting sun caught in her hair, highlighting strands of gold among the chestnut. "Mr. Easton, Lucas," he interrupted. "Please." She smiled. "Lucas. And you must call me Margaret." "Margaret," he repeated, liking the way it felt on his tongue. "I want you to know that I didn't come here to intrude on your family. I came for the teaching position, yes, but also because—" She paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Sarah was dear to me, and knowing her children are here, I couldn't stay away. But I understand they're your family now." Lucas studied her face, finding only sincerity in her expression. "Family can always grow," he said softly, "and the children need all the love they can get." Something passed between them, then an understanding, a connection that transcended words. In that moment, with the sun painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Lucas felt a spark of something he hadn't experienced in a very long time: hope. The weeks that followed saw Margaret becoming a regular presence in the Easton family's life. Lucas arranged for the children to attend school in town, with Hannah riding Penny and carrying Lily in front of her, while the boys rode their own ponies. On days when the weather was poor, Lucas himself would drive them in the wagon. These daily trips to town gave Lucas and Margaret frequent opportunities to cross paths. Sometimes he would stay in town for supplies or business, timing his errands so he might happen to be passing the schoolhouse as classes ended. Margaret seemed equally pleased by these encounters, often inviting him to walk her back to her boarding house or join her for coffee at the town's small cafe. One crisp October afternoon, Lucas arrived at the schoolhouse earlier than usual. Through the window, he could see Margaret at the front of the classroom, animated as she pointed to a large map on the wall. Her enthusiasm was captivating. The children leaned forward in their seats, even the troublemakers who usually slouched at the back. Lucas watched, mesmerized, as she brought the far corners of the world alive for these frontier children. When class was dismissed, the Easton children ran to greet him, bursting with new knowledge. "Uncle Lucas, Miss O'Connor taught us about Africa today," Thomas exclaimed. "There are lions and elephants and all sorts of animals." "Is that so?" Lucas ruffled the boy's hair, his eyes meeting Margaret's as she approached. "They're wonderful students," she said warmly. "Hannah has a particular gift for literature. I've given her some extra books to read." Hannah beamed at the praise, clutching the books to her chest like treasures. "Would you care to join us for dinner again?" Lucas asked Margaret, suddenly feeling like a schoolboy himself. "The children have been asking when you'd visit next." "Just the children?" Margaret teased, a twinkle in her eye. Lucas felt a blush creep up his neck. "Well, I wouldn't mind the company myself." "Then I accept," she replied. "Shall I bring dessert? Mrs. Wilson taught me her apple pie recipe." The children cheered at this news, and Lucas found himself grinning like a fool. As October gave way to November, Margaret became an increasingly integral part of their lives. She joined them for Sunday dinners, helped Hannah with more advanced studies, taught Lily to knit, and even gave the boys tips on improving their reading. The children adored her, and Lucas found himself counting the hours between their meetings. One Sunday, as they sat on the porch after dinner watching the children play in the yard, Lucas finally voiced the question that had been lingering in his mind. "Why did you really come to White Ridge, Margaret? There must be better teaching positions back east." Margaret was quiet for a moment, her hands folded in her lap. "After my father died last year, there was nothing keeping me in Boston. I'd been teaching at a girls' school there, but when I saw the advertisement for White Ridge—" She paused. "Perhaps it sounds foolish, but I felt called here." Sarah had made this place sound so alive and her letters wild and challenging. but real in a way Boston never was. And knowing her children were here. "It's not foolish," Lucas said softly. "My mother thought it was." She couldn't understand why I'd leave civilization for the frontier. Margaret smiled ruefully. "But I've never felt more at home than I do here." "Is that strange?" Lucas shook his head. "Not strange at all. The West has a way of getting into your blood." "It's more than that," Margaret admitted, her eyes meeting his. "It's the people." The weight of her words, and the look in her eyes, made Lucas's heart beat faster. He was about to respond when Lily came running up, demanding Margaret come see the fairy house she'd built under the old oak tree. With an apologetic smile, Margaret allowed herself to be led away, leaving Lucas to ponder what might have been said next. As November progressed, the first snows began to fall, transforming the landscape into a pristine white wonderland. The children's trips to school became more challenging, and there were days when it simply wasn't possible to make the journey. On one such day, when a heavy snowfall had kept them all at the ranch, Lucas was surprised by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Looking out the window, he was astonished to see Margaret riding toward the house, her figure bundled against the cold. He rushed outside to meet her. "Margaret, what are you doing out in this weather?" She dismounted, cheeks flushed from the cold, snowflakes clinging to her hat and coat. "School was canceled due to the snow, and I thought the children might like their lessons just the same. Plus, I brought books from the town library for Hannah." Lucas stared at her in amazement. "You rode all this way in the snow for that?" Margaret smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "Perhaps I also wanted to see how you were all faring in the storm." Before Lucas could respond, the children burst from the house, delighted by Margaret's unexpected arrival. They pulled her inside, where Hannah quickly prepared hot tea while Lily helped her remove her wet outer garments. As Margaret sat by the fire, warming her hands around a steaming cup, Lucas couldn't take his eyes off her. The domesticity of the scene, Margaret in his home, surrounded by the children, bringing light and warmth on a cold winter's day, stirred something profound within him. "You shouldn't have risked the journey," he said later, when the children were occupied with the books and assignments she'd brought. "I'm a better writer than you give me credit for," she replied. "Besides, she hesitated, then continued more softly, "I missed them." "And you?" Lucas felt his breath catch. "We missed you too." Their eyes held for a long moment, the crackling fire the only sound in the room. Lucas found himself leaning toward her, drawn by a force he couldn't name. A crash from the kitchen broke the spell. Thomas had dropped a plate. With a start, Margaret stood to help, and the moment passed, though the feeling it had evoked lingered. The snow continued to fall throughout the day, and by late afternoon, it was clear that the roads would be impassable until morning. "You'll have to stay the night," Lucas said, concern evident in his voice. "I can't let you ride back in this." Margaret bit her lip, clearly torn. "I wouldn't want to impose. It's not an imposition," Lucas assured her. "You can take my room. I'll sleep in the bunkhouse with Hank and Charlie." Hannah, overhearing, quickly chimed in. "Oh, please stay, Miss O'Connor. We can share my room instead. I have plenty of space. And we can make pancakes in the morning." Faced with such enthusiasm, Margaret relented. "If you're sure it's no trouble." "None at all," Lucas said firmly. That evening, as they all sat around the table for dinner, Lucas was struck by how right it felt Margaret at his table, laughing with the children, helping serve the meal, belonging. It was as if she had always been there, filling a void he hadn't fully acknowledged until now. After the children were in bed, Lucas and Margaret sat by the fire, talking late into the night. She told him more about her life in Boston, her teaching career, her dreams of someday writing a book of her own. He shared stories of his early days on the ranch with James, of cattle drives and harsh winters, of the struggles and joys of raising his brother's children. "You've done an incredible thing, Lucas," Margaret said softly. "Taking on 4 children, keeping the ranch running. Many men would have faltered." Lucas shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Their family. There was no choice to make. There's always a choice. You chose love and responsibility. It's admirable." The firelight danced across her features, highlighting the gentle curve of her cheek, the fullness of her lips. Lucas found himself wondering what it would be like to kiss her. As if sensing his thoughts, Margaret's gaze dropped to her hands. "I should probably turn in," she said, her voice slightly breathless. It's getting late. Lucas nodded, standing to show her to Hannah's room. At the doorway, she paused, looking up at him. Thank you for your hospitality, she said softly. Thank you for braving the snow, he replied, equally quiet. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then, with gentle courage, Margaret rose on her tiptoes and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. Good night, Lucas, she whispered, before slipping into the room and closing the door behind her. Lucas stood frozen, his hand rising to touch the spot where her lips had been. Good night, Margaret, he murmured to the closed door, his heart thundering in his chest. The next morning, the snow had stopped, and the sun shone brilliantly on the white landscape. After breakfast pancakes, as Hannah had promised, Lucas prepared to escort Margaret back to town. I can ride alone, she protested. The weather's clear now. I know you can, Lucas said, saddling his horse. But I'd like to accompany you all the same. The truth was, he wasn't ready for her to leave. The night before had shifted something between them, and he felt an urgent need to understand what it meant. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the horses' hooves crunching in the fresh snow. The world around them was pristine and quiet, as if they were the only two people for miles. Lucas, Margaret finally said, drawing her horse alongside his. I want to be honest with you about something. He turned to her, suddenly apprehensive. What is it? She took a deep breath, her eyes meeting his with determination. I care for you and the children very much. More than I perhaps should, given the relatively short time I've known you all. Lucas felt his heart leap. Margaret, please, let me finish, she said gently. I need you to know that I didn't come to White Ridge with any expectations. I didn't come looking for what I seem to have found. But now that I'm here, now that I know you and the children. She paused, gathering her courage. I can't imagine my life without you in it. The confession hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Lucas reined his horse to a stop, Margaret doing the same. In the vast white expanse, with mountains rising in the distance, he looked at this remarkable woman and saw his future. I feel the same, he said simply, his voice rough with emotion. The children adore you. And I find myself thinking about you constantly. When you're not with us, the house feels empty. Margaret's eyes glistened with unshed tears. What are we to do about that, Mr. Easton? She asked, a small smile playing at her lips. Lucas reached across the space between their horses and took her gloved hand in his. Well, Miss O'Connor, I reckon we ought to spend more time together and see where this leads. Her smile widened, bright as the winter sun above them. I would like that very much. As Christmas approached, Margaret spent increasingly more time at the Easton ranch. On weekends, she would ride out early Saturday morning and stay until Sunday evening, helping with household tasks, teaching the children songs and crafts, and spending precious moments alone with Lucas when the opportunity arose. The children had fully embraced her presence in their lives. Hannah, in particular, had blossomed under Margaret's guidance, developing not only academically, but also in confidence. She no longer seemed to bear the weight of being a substitute mother. Instead, she was reclaiming her girlhood, even as she continued to care for her siblings. One evening in mid-December, as Margaret helped Hannah prepare dinner, the young girl asked a question that had clearly been on her mind. Miss O'Connor, do you love Uncle Lucas? Margaret nearly dropped the potato she was peeling. Hannah, that's a very direct question. Hannah shrugged, unrepentant. I've seen how you look at each other, and how happy he is when you're here. Margaret set down her knife, considering her words carefully. Your uncle is a wonderful man, Hannah. And yes, I care for him deeply. Good, Hannah said decisively. Because we all want you to stay. Forever. The simple statement, delivered with such certainty, brought tears to Margaret's eyes. Oh, Hannah, Uncle Lucas is different when you're here, Hannah continued, her wise beyond her years gaze fixed on Margaret. He smiles more. He laughs. Before you came, he was always so serious, so heavy. Margaret was deeply moved by the girl's perception. Your uncle carries a lot of responsibility, but he doesn't have to carry it alone anymore, does he? Hannah asked, hope evident in her voice. Not if you stay. Before Margaret could respond, Lucas entered the kitchen, bringing with him a blast of cold air and the scent of pine. Trees ready in the parlor, he announced, stamping snow from his boots. Found a perfect one just beyond the north pasture. Noticing the emotional atmosphere, he looked between Margaret and Hannah with concern. Everything all right in here? Hannah smiled innocently. Just fine, Uncle Lucas. Miss O'Connor and I were having a woman-to-woman talk. Lucas raised an eyebrow, but didn't press for details. Well, when you ladies are finished with your secret discussions, there's a Christmas tree that needs decorating. That evening, as they hung ornaments on the fragrant pine, some handmade by the children, others precious heirlooms from the Easton family, Lucas found himself repeatedly catching Margaret's eye, each glance carrying more meaning than words could express. Later, after the children had gone to bed, they sat side by side on the sofa, admiring the decorated tree in the dim light of the fire. It's beautiful, Margaret said softly. Yes, it is, Lucas agreed, though he wasn't looking at the tree. Margaret turned to find his gaze fixed on her. The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, Lucas leaned forward and brushed his lips against hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. Margaret responded with a tenderness that matched his own, her hand coming up to rest against his cheek. The kiss deepened, a sweet exploration of newfound intimacy. When they finally pulled apart, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that for quite some time, he admitted. What took you so long? She teased gently. He chuckled, taking her hand in his. Fear, I suppose. Fear that you might not feel the same. Fear that you might eventually realize that life out here is too hard, too isolated compared to Boston. Lucas, Margaret said earnestly, Boston never felt like home the way this place does. The way being with you and the children feels. He searched her eyes, finding only truth there. Margaret, I need you to be sure. The children have already lost so much. If they grow to love you even more than they already do, and then you leave. I'm not leaving, she said firmly. Not unless you send me away. That will never happen, he vowed, drawing her close again. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, with fresh snow blanketing the ranch. Margaret had arrived the previous evening to spend the holiday with the Eastons, bringing gifts for everyone, books for Hannah, a carved wooden horse for Thomas, a puzzle for Daniel, and a beautiful new dress for Lily's doll. The children, in turn, had made gifts for her. Hannah had embroidered a handkerchief, Thomas had whittled a somewhat lopsided bird, Daniel had drawn a careful picture of the schoolhouse, and Lily had strung a necklace of colored beads. Margaret received each gift with genuine delight, hugging the children and declaring that these were the finest presents she had ever received. Lucas watched, his heart full to bursting. In the pocket of his vest was a small box containing his gift for Margaret, a silver locket he'd purchased from the jeweler in town. Inside was a tiny photograph of the children, which Hannah had helped him arrange. But as the morning progressed, Lucas found himself questioning whether the locket was enough to express what was in his heart. By the time they sat down to Christmas dinner, a feast of roast goose, potatoes, carrots from their root cellar, and fresh bread, he had made a decision. After the meal, as they gathered again in the parlor, Lucas cleared his throat. I have one more gift to give, he announced. The children looked on curiously as Lucas took Margaret's hand and led her to stand before the Christmas tree. Margaret, he began, his voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in his stomach. Before you came into our lives, this house was just a place where we lived. You've helped make it a home again. Margaret's eyes widened as Lucas reached into his pocket and withdrew the small box. This is for you, he said, placing it in her palm. But it comes with a question. With trembling fingers, Margaret opened the box, gasping softly at the silver locket nestled inside. When she opened it to find the children's photograph, tears sprang to her eyes. It's beautiful, she whispered. Margaret O'Connor, Lucas said, taking a deep breath. I know we haven't known each other long, but I feel as though I've been waiting for you my whole life. You've brought light and love not just to me, but to these children who mean everything to me. He paused, gathering his courage. Would you do us the honor of becoming a permanent part of our family? Will you marry me? The room fell silent, the children holding their breath as they waited for Margaret's answer. For a moment, Margaret stood speechless, one hand pressed to her heart. Then, with tears streaming down her cheeks, she nodded. Yes, she said, her voice choked with emotion. Yes, Lucas, I will marry you. The room erupted in cheers as Lucas pulled Margaret into his arms, sealing their engagement with a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. "Does this mean we get to call you Mother now?" Lily asked innocently once the excitement had settled somewhat. Margaret knelt down to the little girl's level, taking her small hands. "Only if you want to, Lily. I would never try to replace your mama. But I would be honored to be your mother now, to love you as she would have wanted." Lily considered this seriously for a moment before throwing her arms around Margaret's neck. "I want to," she declared. "I want you to be my new mama." The other children joined the embrace, creating a tangle of arms and happy tears. Lucas stood watching, his own eyes damp, overwhelmed by the love surrounding him. Later that night, after the children had finally gone to bed, exhausted from the excitement of the day, Lucas and Margaret sat on the porch despite the cold, wrapped in blankets in each other's arms. "Are you sure about this?" Lucas asked softly. Marrying a weathered cowboy with 4 children in tow, Margaret turned in his embrace to face him. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life, Lucas Easton. I love you, and I love those children as if they were my own." "They are yours now," Lucas said, stroking her cheek. "We all are." As they sealed this promise with a kiss, snow began to fall again, soft flakes drifting down to blanket the world in fresh white. It seemed fitting, somehow a clean slate, a new beginning for their blended family. The wedding took place on a bright January day in the small church in White Ridge. The entire town turned out for the occasion, the pews filled with well-wishers who had watched the romance unfold over the preceding months. Hannah served as Margaret's maid of honor, beaming with pride in a new blue dress. The boys, scrubbed clean and uncomfortable in their Sunday best, stood beside Lucas at the altar. Lily, as flower girl, scattered rose petals from Mrs. Jensen's hothouse with solemn dedication. When Margaret appeared at the church doors, a collective murmur of appreciation swept through the congregation. She wore a simple gown of ivory satin with lace at the collar and cuffs, not an elaborate Eastern fashion, but a dress befitting a bride who had chosen the authenticity of frontier life over the pretensions of the city. Lucas, watching her walk toward him, felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees. This remarkable woman had journeyed across the country, had braved the hardships of frontier life, had opened her heart to 4 orphan children, all while capturing his heart in the process. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. When they exchanged vows, Lucas's voice rang clear and true across the church. Margaret's response was equally steady, her eyes never leaving his as she promised to love, honor, and cherish him for all her days. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Gardner declared. "You may kiss your bride." The kiss they shared was both tender and passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. The children cheered louder than anyone, their joy unbounded as their family was officially completed. The celebration afterward, held at the town hall, lasted well into the evening. There was dancing and feasting, laughter, and a few happy tears. Margaret danced not only with her new husband, but with each of the children as well, including a special waltz with Thomas, who had practiced diligently for weeks. As the night drew to a close, Lucas found Margaret standing by the window, looking out at the star-filled sky. "Happy, Mrs. Easton?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. She leaned back against him, sighing contentedly. "Perfectly so, Mr. Easton. The children will stay with Hank and Charlie tonight," Lucas murmured against her ear. "I've arranged for us to have the house to ourselves." Margaret turned in his arms, a blush coloring her cheeks. "How thoughtful of you." Later, in the privacy of what was now their bedroom, Lucas and Margaret consummated their marriage with tender passion. Their lovemaking was a discovery, an affirmation of the bond they had formed, a promise of the years to come. Afterward, as they lay entwined beneath the quilts, Margaret's head resting on Lucas's chest, he stroked her hair and marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. "When James died," he said softly, "I thought my life would be nothing but responsibility from then on. Raising the children, running the ranch. I never imagined I could find this kind of happiness again." "Sometimes life gives us unexpected gifts," Margaret replied, pressing a kiss to his shoulder. "Sarah sent me here, I think. Not literally, of course, but her memory guided me to where I needed to be. To where we needed you," Lucas amended, tightening his arm around her. "The children were surviving before, but now they're thriving. You've given them something I couldn't." We complement each other, Margaret said. You give them stability, protection, a strong foundation. I can offer education, nurturing in ways perhaps a man cannot. Together, we make a whole. Together, Lucas repeated, liking the sound of it. Always. Spring arrived with a riot of wildflowers and new beginnings. Margaret had fully settled into life as Mrs. Easton, dividing her time between teaching at the school and running the household. The transition had been remarkably smooth, as if she had always been meant to fill this role. The children continued to flourish. Hannah, now 14, was blossoming into a young woman with dreams of perhaps becoming a teacher herself someday. Thomas had discovered a talent for working with the horses, spending hours with Lucas learning the finer points of training. Daniel, always the quietest of the four, had revealed an aptitude for drawing and would spend hours sketching the landscapes and animals around the ranch. And Lily, sweet Lily, followed Margaret like a shadow, soaking up knowledge and love in equal measure. On a warm Saturday in May, as Margaret hung laundry in the yard with Hannah's help, she paused, pressing a hand to her stomach as a wave of nausea passed over her. Hannah noticed immediately. "Are you all right, Mother?" The term still felt new on her tongue, but it came more naturally each time she used it. Margaret smiled reassuringly. "Just a little dizzy for a moment. I'm fine." But as the day progressed, Margaret found herself battling repeated waves of nausea and fatigue. By evening, when Lucas returned from working in the far pasture, she had begun to suspect the cause. That night, after the children were asleep, she sat beside Lucas on their bed, her hands clasped nervously in her lap. "I have something to tell you," she began. Lucas looked up from the book he'd been reading, concern immediately crossing his features. "What is it? Are you unwell?" Margaret shook her head, a smile beginning to bloom. "Not unwell, no?" Lucas sighed. "I believe I'm going to have a baby." For a moment, Lucas sat perfectly still, her words sinking in. Then, with a whoop of joy that she quickly hushed, mindful of the sleeping children, he gathered her into his arms. "A baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Our baby." Margaret nodded, tears of happiness spilling down her cheeks. "Our child, to join our family." Lucas placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach, his touch reverent. "I never thought. After taking on James's children, I never imagined I'd have a child of my own." "Are you pleased, then?" Margaret asked, though his reaction had already answered her question. "Pleased doesn't begin to describe it," Lucas said, kissing her deeply. "I am overjoyed, my love. Absolutely overjoyed." The news of Margaret's pregnancy was met with excitement from the children, though each reacted in their own way. Hannah was thrilled at the prospect of another sibling, immediately offering to help with the baby once it arrived. Thomas puffed up with importance, declaring that the baby would need a big brother to teach it important things like riding and fishing. Daniel was quietly pleased, already planning to draw pictures for the nursery. Lily, after a moment of contemplation, simply asked if the baby would like to play with her dolls. "If it's a girl, I'm sure she will," Margaret assured her. "And even if it's a boy, he might enjoy them too." As summer progressed, Margaret's body changed with the growing life inside her. Lucas watched these changes with a mixture of awe and protectiveness, insisting she rest more and take on fewer household duties. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she would protest, though she secretly appreciated his concern. Hannah stepped up again, taking on more responsibilities around the house without being asked. But this time was different from when she'd had to become the woman of the house after her parents' deaths. Now, she worked alongside Margaret, learning from her example rather than bearing the burden alone. One evening in late August, as the family sat on the porch enjoying the cool evening breeze, Lily climbed into Margaret's lap, or what was left of it, given her growing belly. "Mama," she said, using the name that now came naturally to her. "Will you still love us when the new baby comes?" Margaret exchanged a look with Lucas before gathering Lily closer. "Oh, my darling, of course I will. Love isn't like a pie with only so many slices to go around. Love grows. The more people you love, the more love you have to give." "Your mother's right," Lucas added, reaching over to ruffle Lily's hair. "When your parents had Thomas after Hannah, did they love Hannah any less?" Lily shook her head. "And when Daniel came along, did they love you and Hannah and Thomas any less?" "No," Lily admitted. "And then when you came along, there was still plenty of love for everyone. Lucas continued. That's how it works. Lily seemed satisfied with this explanation, nestling against Margaret's side. I think I'll be a good big sister, she declared. The very best, Margaret assured her, dropping a kiss on top of her head. October brought with it cooler weather and the imminent arrival of the baby. Dr. Patterson, the town physician, had been making regular visits to check on Margaret's progress and had declared both mother and child to be in excellent health. Any day now, he said during his last visit, patting Margaret's hand. Everything looks just as it should. Lucas had prepared the nursery, converting a small room adjacent to their bedroom that had previously been used for storage. The men of the town, led by Sheriff Wilkins, had surprised them with a handmade cradle, crafted from oak and polished to a warm glow. The women had contributed blankets, tiny clothes, and all the necessities a new mother would need. It was just past midnight on a cool October night when Margaret awakened with a sharp pain across her abdomen. She lay still for a moment, waiting to see if it would recur. When it did, several minutes later, she gently shook Lucas awake. It's time, she whispered. Lucas was instantly alert, years of responding to nighttime emergencies on the ranch serving him well. I'll get Hannah to sit with the younger ones, then ride for the doctor. Margaret nodded, grimacing as another contraction began. Don't wake Lily if you can help it. She'll only worry. Lucas dressed quickly, then roused Hannah, who immediately understood the situation. I'll take care of everything here, Uncle Lucas, she promised, her young face serious. You just get Dr. Patterson. The next few hours passed in a blur of pain and anticipation for Margaret. Hannah proved her maturity once again, providing cool cloths for Margaret's forehead, helping her walk when the doctor suggested it might ease the labor, and offering words of encouragement throughout. Lucas returned with Dr. Patterson and Mrs. Wilson, who had experience assisting with deliveries. Though tradition dictated that men should stay far from the birthing room, Lucas refused to leave Margaret's side, holding her hand through each contraction, wiping her brow, and murmuring words of love and support. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Margaret gave a final push, and their child entered the world with a lusty cry. A girl, Dr. Patterson announced, placing the squirming, red-faced infant on Margaret's chest. A beautiful, healthy girl. Margaret looked down at their daughter, tears of joy streaming down her face. Hello, little one, she whispered. We've been waiting for you. Lucas, overcome with emotion, could only stare in wonder at the tiny life they had created together. When Margaret offered the baby to him, he took her with hands that trembled slightly, cradling her against his chest as if she were made of the most delicate porcelain. She's perfect, he finally managed, his voice rough with feeling. Absolutely perfect. Later that morning, after Margaret had rested and the baby had been cleaned and swaddled, the other children were allowed to meet their new sister. They entered the bedroom quietly, eyes wide with curiosity and excitement. Children, Margaret said, her voice tired but happy. Meet your sister, Sarah Elizabeth Easton. Hannah was the first to approach, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. She's named for our mother? Lucas nodded. And for your grandmother Elizabeth. We thought it fitting. She's so small, Thomas observed, peering at the infant with fascination. All babies start small, Margaret explained. But she'll grow quickly, you'll see. Daniel, silent as usual, simply reached out to stroke the baby's cheek with one finger, a smile spreading across his face when Sarah turned toward his touch. Lily climbed carefully onto the bed beside Margaret. Can I hold her? I'll be very careful. Margaret exchanged a glance with Lucas, who nodded. Sit back against the pillows, he instructed, helping Lily into position before gently placing Sarah in her arms, his hands hovering close in case support was needed. Lily looked down at her baby sister with an expression of pure wonder. Hello, Sarah, she said softly. I'm your big sister Lily. I'm going to teach you all sorts of things when you get bigger. The scene before him, Margaret in their bed, surrounded by all 5 children, their family now complete, filled Lucas with a contentment he had never thought possible. From the depths of tragedy, with the loss of his brother and sister-in-law, had grown this beautiful, blended family, bound together by love rather than merely blood. As the winter snow once again blanketed the Montana landscape, The Easton Ranch was a haven of warmth and happiness. The house, once simply functional, had become truly a home under Margaret's care. Curtains adorned the windows, comfortable cushions softened the wooden chairs, and bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes for both education and pleasure. But more than these physical changes, it was the atmosphere that had transformed. Laughter echoed through the rooms. Music filled the evenings as Margaret played the small piano Lucas had surprised her with for Christmas, and the scent of fresh baked bread was a constant reminder of the nurturing presence at the heart of their home. Baby Sarah thrived, growing stronger each day, surrounded by the love of her parents and siblings. Her first smile, first laugh, and first attempts to roll over were celebrated as major accomplishments by the entire family. On a quiet evening in February, as a snowstorm raged outside, the Eastons gathered in the parlor. Hannah was reading aloud from Little Women, a book Margaret had introduced her to. Thomas and Daniel were playing checkers by the fire, with Lucas offering occasional strategic advice. Lily sat at Margaret's feet, practicing her letters while Margaret nursed Sarah in the rocking chair Lucas had crafted for her. In the peaceful scene, Lucas found his gaze drawn to his wife, marveling at how completely she had transformed their lives. Her strength, her intelligence, her boundless capacity for love all had created this haven where once there had been merely survival. As if sensing his thoughts, Margaret looked up, meeting his eyes across the room. The love that passed between them in that glance was palpable, a living thing that had grown from tentative beginnings to this deep, abiding connection. Later, after the children were asleep and Sarah had been settled in her cradle, Lucas and Margaret stood together at the window, watching the snow swirl in the darkness. "What are you thinking?" Margaret asked, leaning back against him as his arms encircled her waist. "I was thinking about how different everything was before you came," Lucas admitted. "We were getting by, the children and I, but that was all. Just getting by. And now?" she prompted, turning to face him. "Now we're living," he said simply. "Really living, not just surviving. You brought that to us, Margaret. You brought love enough for all." Margaret smiled, reaching up to trace the lines of his face with gentle fingers. "It was always there, Lucas. The capacity for love, for joy, it was in you, in the children. I just helped you find it again." "You did more than that," Lucas insisted. "You completed us, made us whole." As he lowered his lips to hers in a tender kiss, Lucas Easton knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together, their family bound by a love strong enough to weather any storm. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the land in a pristine blanket of white. But inside the Easton home, warmth prevailed, the warmth of family, of belonging, of a love that had journeyed across a continent to find its rightful place in the heart of the Montana wilderness.